Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Dave. Looks like Will's joined us as a speaker. Will, nice to have you here. So we start talking tokenomics.
Hi, everyone.
All right, looks like Gregory are joined. Hi, Justin from the Gravity teams out there. I see Dell, Staken. Good to see you. Henrik, inviting you up. All right, Gregory, you've got the keys here.
All right,
Take it
all
away.
right. I'm just going to do a quick share here. Apologies for a moment while I, just kind of do a quick round of making sure that people have been invited to our little gathering. Good morning to everyone. So lovely to see people. Very excited to dig in a little bit. Today is going to be a fun and geeky conversation. We're going to have Justin up here from Gravity Bridge to talk a bit about bridging. We're going to have Henrik from eMoney to talk about eMoney. We're going to have probably a smattering of different validators and opinions. We're going to try to cover the two major topics in Regen Tokenomics conversation. One of them, actually, broadly speaking, isn't tokenomics, which is the governance proposal around adding new IBC denom tokens or currencies to our allow list on Regen Ledger so that people who are listing eco credits for sale in the marketplace can choose what type of currency they'd like to receive in exchange for those eco credits. So that's going to be the first topic that we explore today. I'm pretty excited about that topic. There's some complexity that we'll get into. There's been some really great conversation, and we'll kind of try to frame that out, have some conversations, hear from different representatives in the community who are bringing forward proposals, just so people can have a sense of things. And of course, I think one of the intentions here is to have a good open conversation, and we'll sort of backlink this sort of public conversation back into the Commonwealth forum discussion, just so people can also, if they'd like, as they're thinking about things, sort of go back and review these conversations and just get a sense of things. So that'll be conversation number one this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. And then conversation number two, my hope is we will also get to have a conversation that includes Sacha from Haifa Co-op, maybe our friends at Block Science, Will from the foundation. I'm sure, Will, you'll also be chiming in on the allow list conversation. But the second round of today is a tokenomics, token economics conversation related to this idea of amending our token economics to be able to directly mint new regen to an interchain account that is fueling liquidity incentives into a gauge on osmosis to be able to incentivize liquidity provision. And maybe taking a step back from that, I actually think that the texture of the conversation is going to be one in which we explore the larger framing, because I think as those who've been following along in the forum, I think there's many community members who think that perhaps that is one tool of many that we probably need to assess a little bit more holistically. So anyway, that's going to be how do we as a community think about maintaining liquidity as an important part of the of network health. So that'll be the second part of the conversation. Hopefully we're going to get to do both. They're both pretty intricate and expansive, so it's possible we'll have to push that second conversation to another time. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be geeky. I hope everybody is ready. And I'm just going to quickly share this again via Twitter, because I just did I just sort of did it by a DM to a few people. So I just want to make sure. So apologies for a brief dead air here as I share, which is always helpful to just let people know what's cooking. So awesome. So I think with that framing, also just I would love it if people, I see several people who've been involved in forum discussions or who have chimed in community calls around these topics. If you're interested, please hop in. David, if you want to invite Ishmael in, I know he's been very active. Please, by all means, do. It'd be lovely to get his voice in. Also, David, if you don't mind pinging Corey, I see Ishmael in there. If you don't mind pinging Corey, I sort of forgot to do that. So he had some really salient points in the forum. We might want to weave him in as well. So with that, I'm going to just take a quick pause. Will, do you have anything that you'd like to add before I invite Justin to share a little bit of insight around Gravity Bridge and any of his thoughts related to this conversation?
Thanks, Gregory. Yeah, no, that sounds like a great framing for the hour. And I guess just to frame out the conversation a little bit on the bridge side, it is a sort of a sprawling and nuanced conversation at this point. There's a lot of great case studies from other ecosystems. One of the ones I've been closely paying attention to is in osmosis. And then with current events, with so many recent bridge hacks, there's I think the major dynamic on my mind is the balance between a simplified user experience and, on the other hand, a diversity of different assets, so that if one bridge is runs into issues, that people aren't locked in an illiquid token or something like that. So that's kind of the biggest tension on my mind, is just how do we balance user experience with also having backup options and kind of a little bit of a portfolio of tokens for people to be able to work with. But I'll leave it there and hand it over to Justin.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Justin.
So I am the lead developer on Gravity Bridge, and I, along with Jahan, did a lot of the original design on the Gravity Bridge, which is now used by I think we're rounding up on 10 different chains. It may be more than that, actually, because people don't always tell me when they're forking Gravity Bridge for their own use. But anyways, that's a number that I really like to quote, because it focuses on how Gravity Bridge is really used by the Cosmos ecosystem. And when it comes to people taking a look at the code and deciding what bridge that they want for their own project, they all choose Gravity Bridge. And I think this is really important from a security, like usability and sort of community understanding level. Now, to sort of get back to the discussion at hand here. So let's see. There's been a lot of allusions to things that have already gone on, as far as sort of the how should I put it? Sort of the bridge wars that we're all in, where sort of the three primary bridges in the Cosmos ecosystem, two of them are fighting for exclusivity. You know, they want to be the bridge of a particular chain. And Gravity, as usual, is taking a bit of a drastically different approach. We don't think exclusivity is good for the Cosmos community. It's not good for innovation. It's not good for Cosmos DeFi, and it's certainly not good for the users of the chain. So, I mean, this sort of dichotomy that Will presented earlier about UX versus potential security and risk, you know, I think we can all agree that, you know, bridges are not zero risk endeavors, no matter who does them or how they're designed. Gravity Bridge has really excellent security, and I've been very happy with how it's held up. And the sort of point that I'm getting to here is that bridge exclusivity or stablecoin exclusivity or all of that really exposes a chain and its users very heavily to black swan events, and particularly bad things happening to one bridge. We've seen this happen on Osmosis. We've seen this happen on EVMOS. And, I'm sure we'll continue to see it happen as time goes on, unfortunately. So the counter argument about UX, like, okay, well, is user experience really worth that increased risk or that sort of monoculture where there's one particular thing that a chain is using as their sort of medium of exchange? And I think this is entirely the wrong way to frame the problem. And that is to say that, hey, we're taking a technical problem, which is user experience, and framing it in a way that pushes more risk onto the user. This doesn't make sense for the Cosmos community, the Regen community, or really anyone. Obviously Ethereum doesn't go, obviously there isn't a big, drama on Ethereum every time a new stablecoin comes out, because like, oh no, the existence of a new stablecoin will lower everybody else's liquidity. It doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because technical improvements around efficient stable swaps and range liquidity, like what's available on Crescent now and what will hopefully be available on Osmosis soon, mean that the liquidity price of supporting multiple stables doing these swaps is very, very low. And this whole argument just kind of disappears. And you're asking yourself, well, why would I want to make it harder for people from one path to on board? So, if you try and choose one stable, let's say we chose Osmosis USDC as the stable to use for the regen market. Well, that's going to make it harder for people to onboard from USD on ramps. They'll have to go through Osmosis to get to regen, even if they weren't Osmosis users at all. So if you want to have an on ramp for multiple different types of liquidity, you immediately run into this, UX problem of needing to have eco credits sold with diverse assets. But this is a solvable problem, and it's a problem Ethereum solved a long time ago, and the Cosmos ecosystem has caught up with. So I don't know. I think this is really how I'd like to frame the discussion. And I know I didn't talk a huge amount about Gravity Bridge, and that's because when it comes to the decision of how eco credit should be priced and whether or not that should be more restrictive or more permissive, I think the argument is that it needs to be more permissive for the good of the regen ecosystem, for the good of the Cosmos ecosystem, regardless of what bridge is used. And I think it's very important to present that in sort of a bridge or a stable coin or medium of exchange agnostic way. Because if we continue to create these monocultures, we're creating a fragile Cosmos ecosystem, and we're freezing out future innovation in stablecoins or other mediums of exchange. And that's just bad for everybody. So I think that's my sort of opening statement. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Justin. And, so I think, I just want to sort of frame out a little bit, sort of like reground this in the UI and sort of like, I guess the questions that I feel like we as Regen Network, as a community, need to be asking, and then how we're thinking about how that fits into the sort of like the larger ecosystem and the evolution of the larger ecosystem and our coherence with sort of principled and durable approach. So in the way that Regen Ledger works is we as Regen token holders can govern the tokens that are on the allow list for people to list eco credits in the marketplace. There can be a plurality of those, And the way the functionality works is if I'm a project developer or land steward and I'm bringing eco credit to the marketplace, I can choose what, if, for instance, if there were multiple different currencies, I can choose between them in order to list. And so, at the moment in this sort of fragmented marketplace, that there's a strength to that, which means that somebody could be bringing something to market and understand that, okay, I'm listing this specifically for osmosis degens to be able to come to Regen, purchase it, basket it, and move it over to yield farming. And someone else might be choosing to list for a different market segment. Say they're listing for a market segment of European retail offsetters who want to be offsetting their carbon footprint for a small business or a family, and they may be very excited about e-money and fiat on and off ramps and the ease of that. And some other market segment may have sort of a different. Now, of course, that creates a little bit of, that plurality also creates complexity. So I don't think we can sort of fully discount all that, but just to sort of land the functionality here, and there's been maybe some misapprehension. Regen doesn't need to choose, and I think this really resonates with what Justin's talking about. Regen doesn't need to choose a single currency, right? People could also choose non-stable options. So just to sort of reiterate that. Now, Justin, what I'm hearing you talk about sort of like more broadly is what is the healthy interaction between sort of the IBC ecosystem and the massive market and liquidity and DeFi tools on Ethereum, and how do we manage that well? And you're sort of describing sort of these competing visions, right, between the approach that you and the Gravity team are taking and the approach that other teams are taking, sort of trying to capture a network effect, maybe in a way that in the long term isn't actually going to be very durable, right? Because it doesn't, because users aren't going to sort of, it probably isn't going to be sticky. Is that sort of accurate, that you're both sort of explaining maybe how it might be problematic in terms of health, but also how those strategies might not actually be durable because you're trying to force network effect in a way that isn't going to have staying power due to, lowering the cost of stable swaps and, sort of other elements in which this kind of liquidity management can happen much more seamlessly? Is that an accurate summary, Justin, of kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, yes, it is. Thank you. And, I think as we know from sort of the environment, monocultures are not very resilient. And the same is true financially. And it's not necessary. Obviously, there are vibrant DeFi ecosystems that don't rely on a monoculture, that rely on better technology to take these UX problems. And, there's work to be done to smooth over these UX problems, but the users don't see it. It's not something that has to be imposed on them.
Totally. And I really love, there was some really cool exploration in some chats that I was a part of back some time ago around what would happen if we could take some of these amazing tools around stable swaps and other things and sort of put them under the hood and use the fees that are generated for the service of creating that beautiful user experience where the user does, there's just sort of swapping taking place, super low fees, but there are fees that are accumulating. You ship that technology, and a big portion of those fees basically go to start purchasing eco credits or something like that, where you're both creating a beautiful user experience and you're driving demand into, what we're all excited about in Regen Network is sort of valuing ecological regeneration. So I super appreciate that vision and invitation. And I think, it really jives with my bias here, which is that, we don't need to sort of zero in on the one currency to rule them all for Regen. And in fact, we should have a bit of a plurality. And and we shouldn't probably in governance be bottlenecking too much. As long as there's a pretty reasonable case that it's stable and safe, and and people want it. That for right now, we should be leaning towards a yes, right? And then we can start pruning and observing and engaging. And if there's issues with something, we can take them off the allow list. So that's kind of my summary of sort of the wisdom that you're imparting, Justin, from the bridge perspective, and kind of like the larger conversation. Will, I don't know, do you want to, I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you have anything to add before I bring Henrik up, who's going to talk about e-money? And they've just put just yesterday put a really well written post in Commonwealth, sort of explaining e-money and socializing that with the community. So I want to give Henrik a chance to actually speak about that concrete example. But Will, do you have anything that you want to sort of add or interject in the midst of the conversation here?
Well, I guess just to say, Justin, thanks for your comments there, and I totally agree about the risk of monocultures, and that obviously that is aligned with Regen's mission around regenerative agriculture and kind of the paradigms that come along with that. I'll just stop there and hand it over to Henrik.
Welcome up, Henrik. Very excited to have you. Thanks for taking some time in your evening to come and share a little bit.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Do you want to just give a quick introduction to everybody around e-money first, and just so everybody kind of gets an understanding of that, and then you can dig into the proposal and anything else that you think is worth sharing?
Definitely. Thanks. E-money, we are issuing stablecoins. It's what I used to call boring kind, but I guess after all the events of May, it's just it's less boring now to make them. It's the kind where we have money in the bank account that supports the value of the tokens. So we are based in the Europe. So what we're doing is we are trying to align with the European legislation to issue these stablecoins. It's important for us to be compliant with the current legislation. We regularly publish proof of funds to prove that the money are actually there, in order to increase transparency and trust in our stablecoins. So we're a native Cosmos project and have been building for quite a while. The building part has obviously not been everything we've been doing. We've also been doing a lot of regulatory exploration and things like that, and establishing banking relationships, which is also quite time consuming. So in the end, what we have is a product that is tied to the euro. So it's a euro stablecoins. We joined the IPC gang, as we call it, like I believe in September last year, and we're present on Osmosis, and we are now also looking for ways to expand to beyond Osmosis, and also to other ecosystems in general. We connected. We've integrated with Axelar. Sorry, Justin, and we are hoping to eventually also have a presence on Ethereum and Avalanche and on some of the other networks that are available. I believe that was the overview of it. So we noticed the proposal you guys are having for having an allow list for currencies, and I read through it, and I think the criteria resonated quite a bit with me. I like that. So we what's the idiom? We threw our hat in the ring. Is that a saying?
Yeah, definitely. That's you got it.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Second language. Anyway, so we put a proposal up on the Commonwealth to be accepted for the allow list. You could say that as regards to our tokens, I guess the UI issues you were discussing with Justin and become less evident since we are IBC enabled. So it's essentially a one hop thing from our zone to yours. So I have I put my proposal up, my draft proposal up on the Commonwealth, which goes through some of the same stuff I've been mentioning here. And well, I'm ready to answer questions, both in Commonwealth and also here if anyone has any comments or questions.
Fantastic. I'm just linking, just so everybody knows, the tweet that I made about the Twitter Spaces. If you were to go to my Twitter, I just threw up a link to Henrik's Commonwealth. So if people want to hop in there and comment, read, question, sort of chip in, please do. So you sort of explained a little bit, Henrik, about your the e-money approach to sort of being a regulatory compliant euro-backed stablecoin. And I'd love it if you just would maybe give us a little bit of an overview of, I guess, how adoption is going of that, you know, and maybe with a flavor of how e-money being part of the ecosystem of currencies that people can interact with in the Regen marketplace might play well with your intended audience and, you know, sort of Eurozone, maybe carbon credit purchasers.
Yeah, definitely, sure. I mean, so just to add a little bit, we do support more than the euro. We actually support also the Swiss franc and the Nordic currencies. The issue is that the demand is bigger for the euro, so that's kind of the one we're focusing on right now. So our thesis back when we started, 4 years ago now, it was that blockchain technology would eventually enter the mainstream. So there would be demand for like local currencies such as the euro and Swiss franc and things like that. I'm slightly disappointed by how that turned out, to be honest. I feel like much of crypto and blockchain are moving away from the real world usage and focusing more on like the whole DeFi, degen side of things, which has mixed results, to say the least. So, I mean, that's also why I really like projects such as Regen, which has very strong ties to the real world and is actually trying to solve real world problems with this technology. Regarding adoption, I mean, we have you could say it's not going amazing. We have some strong pools on osmosis, I believe, where we are market making to ensure that the prices are correct. It's tough to gain adoption on these things because it requires a large amount of liquidity to be ready. So we're talking to people who might be interested in providing liquidity in euro on various marketplaces. But it's a tough market to fight the incumbents in. To say, I mean, you can say
the incumbents in the crypto space, like the USDCs,
USDC,
sort of like the stables, yeah.
And USDT. The two big stables. Well, there used to be three, but now two.
Which is, you know, just to sort of take a step back, I actually think, you know, it's all about user experience in a way, right? So if I think Regen is really hoping, and this is going to take some time to evolve, so everybody's going to need to be patient and sort of chip in. But I think the vision here for Regen is to make a marketplace where people can interact with their currency of choice in a very seamless way. And a lot of European companies, if we're going to be driving adoption in the carbon market, for instance, you know, I would really like to see a marketplace in which a company can come in, easily estimate their emissions that they need for compliance, and make a purchase super simply. And obviously those sorts of customers and that sort of turnover in the classic sort of currency, you know, realm where you really just need a medium of exchange. You know, you don't need, you know, and it's the foundation sort of before you get to the financialization of things and using it as collateral and other stable coins and all of this other sort of like instrumentation is taking place. For our use case, I think just sort of the the stability and the usability are the most important things. So there might be a very sort of interesting opportunity there to be bridging out beyond the normal user groups, the normal sort of degen sort of landscape, and into just sort of normal retail and institutional adoption in carbon markets and maybe even beyond. So that's that's just some thoughts there for both for you, Henrik, and I guess for the larger community.
Yeah, I really feel like those you could call them values, I guess. I mean, they really align well with what we've been thinking, that crypto is fun with as long as we do DeFi, but I mean, it doesn't really change much in the real world. I sometimes feel like crypto was promising the world like an alternative to the financial system, and then what we've been giving them instead is like kind of a speed run of the financial crisis of the.
Well, I think that I've seen some really nice takes that it's sort of like the crypto world. We did a speed run of financial markets and their collapse and why. And okay, we can learn and we can update. We did a speed run of like art markets and NFTs. And now I think some people are saying we're in a speed run of governance. So we'll see how this all sort of ends up playing out. But I think that's a good metaphor to keep in mind. And those of us who maybe take the time to understand history, perhaps we don't have to force ourselves through speed running the simulation, I guess, in order to understand where things are going to go. Cool. Well, thank you so much for hopping up. Are there any questions, Justin, Will, or if anybody in the audience wants to raise hand, hop up and ask Heinrich questions, or, this will sort of be the last call for questions or comments regarding the allow list conversation. I'll do a quick summary of that before we sort of shift gears. And then I think we're going to use the remaining 30 minutes of Regenerati News Hour to talk about liquidity and the role of liquidity in network health and some options for maintaining, growing liquidity, and maybe the role of token economics in that. So we do have Matt Barlin here. I'm very excited to have you, Matt. I'm not sure if you're on your phone or on a computer. You need to be on a phone to do Twitter Spaces. So if you're listening to me, hop on your phone or download the app and I'll get you up here. Sacha, I sent an invite to you as well. So any questions before we sort of shift gears into the liquidity conversation? And Henrik and Justin, you two are more than welcome and very invited to take part in this. I think both of you would probably have great insight if you'd like to sort of stick around and engage in that conversation. I think it's very interesting, even beyond the walls of, or the imaginary sort of digital realm that is Regen Network as this sovereign application-specific blockchain. I think most blockchain communities need to think both about security, right, and utility and liquidity. And in this conversation, we're talking about the role of tokenomics in maintaining healthy liquidity. Sacha, welcome up. It's great to have you. I'm gonna try to make sure that Matt is here. Sacha, you want to introduce yourself and just share any thoughts that you have to sort of kick off this phase?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? It's first
loud
time
and clear
using this. Yeah. Okay. So I'm Sasha. I'm with Hytha Co-op. I work on mainly hub related topics, but also contributing to Regen in my own time. And I mean, in summary, or as an introduction, I guess, the angle I'm coming at this from is I worried that the way the tokenomics upgrade has been framed and proposed is a little slapdash and perhaps doesn't challenge certain assumptions deeply enough. And if I had to sort of focus on 3 points, I would say that I don't feel there's enough backwards analysis on, for example, the examples that were listed in the original post that I think will put out. There are a couple of projects mentioned, and you know the implication was that increasing liquidity rewards led to some good things happening. But if you zoom out on a long enough time horizon, that's not so clear. And so I'd want to see that looked at more deeply. The second thing, which I've touched on, I think, with Gregory and Zagam and Matt from Block Science, is perhaps we should be thinking more deeply about the wider design space. And by that I mean, how do we get, you know, assuming we want to incentivize liquidity, how do we make sure, or are there better ways to make sure we're incentivizing the right people, the people that are in there for the long term? And there, I think both Matt, Zagam, and Gregory have some really interesting ideas. And then finally, the third point is I don't think that there's well, I'd love to see this tied into a more long-term vision. You know, sort of like, this is the long-term overarching vision on the tokenomics front, and this is why this makes sense now, and this is how we're going to transition from this to this longer-term vision. And I've sort of touched on this with interfluid staking and proposing that as a way to incentivize slow liquidity. So in a sense, you can have liquidity providers that are also have the same unbonding period as stakers. So, and you can have stakers that double up as liquidity providers, and that's kind of that could, both of those things put together could provide a way for the community to generate enough returns to be sustainable, but at the same time not dilute the core community that I think is made up of stakers right now. So that those are sort of the angle I'm coming at, and I'll let Gregory respond to that.
Well, it's a great overview, Sasha, and yeah, and I'd like to invite Matt into the conversation with Block Science. Had a really great conversation with Matt and Michael over the weekend about this. I'm super grateful for their time. And Matt, do you want to introduce yourself and just share any thoughts and observations from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Gregory. Yeah, so I'm Matt Barlin, a lead systems engineer at Block Science. Been with the company since the beginning, and have been looking at these economic incentive programs, or really just economics of these blockchain systems from that kind of ecosystem point of view, and have done extensive simulations and modelings and buildings of these worlds. Yeah, so I think certainly agree a lot with what Sasha said. I think starting with if we went on the narrative, or if we stayed on the path of, hey, let's do this big incentive for liquidity, then I think we know how that plays out. Meaning people will hear about it, they'll jump in, they'll get essentially the free tokens that come along with playing the liquidity mining game, or farming, or whatever you want to call it. And then they're going to play the game of when's the right time for them to get out. So I don't know if someone has a strong objection to how that probably plays. I think you're going to have that amount of churn. Maybe you keep some people, maybe you get some of the right people, but those are maybes. What will mostly happen is you'll get some excitement, you'll mint a bunch of tokens, which will be inflationary, and you'll get some price bump, but then you'll also get some price dump. And then where you left in terms of your overall supply for regen, and so then where are you in terms of the health of the health of the system? You now have an increased supply. Maybe you have some better holders, but maybe you really don't, you've gotten some more excitement. And then it may leave you in a worse place from moving forward from that point. So I'll pause there for like if anyone has like a strong like counter argument to there, but then I would want to take a step back to kind of go through the like some of the ideas about what could be done.
Yeah, maybe I could hop in for a minute just to zoom out for a moment on this larger arc. So Gregory and I set to writing an ecological economics paper along with our associate Kyle Burchard in 2018, and quickly found that before we could articulate the entirety of our vision for what's possible with ecological economics through our token design at Regen, we discovered that the first thing we needed to attend to was network security. And that was looking at tokenomics from a proof of stake and game theory perspective and establishing a very strong basis there before kind of moving up the value stack to kind of tokenomics that address those ecological aspects of our work. So I see this kind of network security as the layer one tokenomics. And then there's kind of this layer two tokenomics that has popped up as an issue relating to liquidity and the ability of users to be able to interact with the Regen token that also comes in the stack before ecological economics. So essentially having this three-layer stack: level one, security; level two, liquidity; level three, ecological economics, and getting into all the possibilities with kind of reimbursing contributors to ecological methodologies and credit classes and all those other things. So just to kind of paint the arc of what's happened with liquidity last year in the kind of bull run, you could sell $20,000 of Regen and not have a price impact exceeding 1%. And just a note on terminology, Sunny was calling out yesterday, we shouldn't be using the term slippage to describe price impact on an automated market maker. That shift in price, it's something that's predictable. You see it up front. Slippage as a trading term means that amount which you don't really know until after the trade has been executed. So just to say, I had been using the term slippage. We should be using the term kind of price impact. So just to say, you could trade 20K in Regen and have a 1% price impact. Right now, in the largest pool, which is the Osmosis Regen pool, that 1% price impact occurs at a $3,500 trade. So that, from my perspective, that makes the Regen token much less accessible as a token to businesses or essentially enterprise scale projects, including validators. That if someone wants to move a significant amount of Regen around, they need to do it in kind of little, who knows, $500 or $1,000 increments over some series of time. So I think it significantly limits the ability of enterprises to interact with the Regen token. And this is a broader market problem. Regen isn't the only project with this issue, but I do see it as a limiting factor going forward. So I guess from my perspective, that's one of the design specifications that I'm holding in mind, is how do we have enough liquidity so that enterprise scale users can interact with the Regen token without causing substantial price movement.
Right. So there's a parameter there. There's sort of a parameter or a goal. We've also had, Sasha has invited us to consider, how are we ensuring, I guess, sort of a match between sort of alignment and contribution of community members and sort of incentives and inflation, like, where are we spending money and who's it going to? And is that money going to, if we're minting Regen, is it going to sort of, I don't know, sort of predatory isn't the right word, but ephemeral degens who are looking for the highest yield, and are they going to move on, or is it incentivizing people who are also going to be contributing other value? So that's a question. I'm just trying to list out questions. So there's one is, we need some amount of basic liquidity that seems to be higher than we have in order to have network health and adoption. We also want to design for the right stakeholders engaging in the risk reward activities of liquidity provision and being rewarded for that. So those are two things that I'm just sort of picking out as design considerations. And the third that I heard Sasha mention is just that he would like, as a community member, in order to support anything, for it to be more clearly tied into sort of a holistic evolution of token economics. Now, I myself feel like, token economics, there's a balance between sort of like what you sort of engineer up front versus the first principles you use to evolve it. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Michael Zargam, welcome up. It's really great to have you. I'd love it if you want to share any reflections or comments about what you're hearing here.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thanks for having me. Excuse me. Secondly, it's funny always to hear people kind of talking about token economics, because, I actually find the term to be kind of unhelpful. In fact, I would backtrack a little bit. We were talking about ecological economics a little bit earlier, and in my mind, thinking about economics in terms of information systems and even sort of natural information systems is often more helpful than trying to sort of envision them as sort of like top-down designed systems. In the case of Regen and this particular discussion, my reflection on that is, we're talking about some underlying kind of constraints that we have to handle to start off: network security, and to a degree also the available liquidity is necessary for basically the information to flow without having, sort of sufficient adverse or significant adverse impacts per the price impact discussion. But I want to kind of tie this back to the overall sort of mission and goal of the Regen Network, which relates to the actual environmental systems. And the reason I want to make this connection is just to remind us that, like, we're satisfying constraints when we design for things like network security and sufficient liquidity. They're things that need to be present in order to succeed. They're necessary but not sufficient. And so, we need to be looking at the way in which we go about satisfying those constraints and making sure that they're reasonably aligned with the sort of organizational purpose. And I think that ties back into the comment about, who are we incentivizing when we're incentivizing liquidity? Wherever possible, I kind of agree that we should be looking for ways to bring, mission or purpose aligned liquidity into liquidity pools, bring mission or purpose aligned, validators into the validator set to provide network security. And it's kind of hard because those systems have different functions or purposes themselves. The subsystems are not strictly aligned with the sort of overall goal. And yeah, so I'll just kind of like end on this to say that that's a recurring theme in natural systems. And some of the work I've done lately with Kelsey Nabin has been looking at the way that we can use some concepts from like the viable system model, which is Stafford Beer, and a few other existing conceptual frameworks for dealing with systems that are sort of fractal in nature, have sort of purpose, but also have parts that are maybe having their own purposes. And the point is really that it's not easy. There's not like a right answer that we're just going to find. So we're really navigating the specific context of Regen. And at the moment, the binding constraints do seem to be related to liquidity. And so we're looking at ways to navigate away from that constraint, to unbind that constraint so that we can focus on sort of the primary goals of the organization.
And
Does
just
that make sense?
that makes a lot of sense. And just to sort of like add on to that, something that was one of my big takeaways, and I shared this in the summary of our conversation in Commonwealth for those of you who would like to look at that, who are sort of interested in sort of the rigorous governance conversation we're trying to build around this. Go have a look. I put it in the tweet thread. I think it's in that tweet thread. If not, I'll re-loop that. But just one of my takeaways was that you said, Zargam, is just that, you know, we probably having a bit of a precautionary principle. So saying, okay, we as a community, we want to build and maintain liquidity, and we want to evolve a set of protocol owned and governed tools to do so, right? But we want to make sure not to overshoot and be too aggressive in building too much liquidity at the cost of inflation, because that could cause a dump and could actually hurt the community. So sort of there's a conservative precautionary principle. So like, Will, I'm sort of saying this to you because you've been driving some of the movement here. So I don't think anybody's saying like, no, let's not do that. But what's pushing back is, how does this fit in with the whole? Can we describe how this is fitting in holistically? And can it be sort of sized and governed in a way that doesn't overshoot? And that then we could ratchet it up if need be, because you can't really go ratchet it back down again without sort of economic damage being done. So so with that, I want to invite Ishmael up. Welcome, great to have you. Do you want to just do you want to share thoughts, comments, questions? Nice to see you up here.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for having me, and great to have this space open for us to discuss all of these issues. And I had to step out for a little while. There was a refrigerator delivery, so I've missed a lot of the conversation. So I'm not sure what was already said, but I would like to, I guess, add something of importance that I'm kind of looking at and trying to navigate this. And from the UX experience, the user experience, how can we make the marketplace the most accessible and easy to use, and make sure that we have an experience that keeps buyers coming back and tells other interested buyers, come to Regen Marketplace. It's really easy. You can get your credits. They're reputable. There's lots of information backing them, etc. So looking at the UX experience, Corey brought up a very important point recently about how the fees would still need to be paid in Regen. And so I was thinking about the new transaction tips feature that was released in the Cosmos SDK 0.46, and wondering how we might tie that in. And ultimately, I guess the holy grail would be if we could have an interface where whatever the buyer has in their wallet, they're able to select the credits and purchase with that currency. And on the back end, it would take care of the fees, take care of the swapping, etc., so that it would be a seamless experience for the user. So that may take some time to get to that point, and there may be many different hurdles, but that's kind of like what I'm hoping for, that we could find a way to get to that point sometime in the future. But yeah, I just wanted to add that. So thanks so much, everyone, and keep rocking on.
Thanks, Ishmael. And just to sort of like land or categorize that, so Ishmael, I think, had a technical interruption. And so that is a comment related to the first phase of the conversation around the allow list and the, sort of like the experience around how people, what currencies people can list credits for, and what the experience is for people listing, purchasing, selling, retiring, and interacting with that utility side of things. So, so shifting back, I sort of want to like reweave this conversation on the liquidity side. Will, I kind of want to pass it back over to you and just sort of, it's like Michael and Matt and Sasha have all shared, I think, some creative restraints around how they think the appropriate way to approach this is. And I'm just curious how this is landing, what's moving for you, what might be evolving. Yeah, just, share some thoughts.
Yeah, and I'd also like to call out Sean Strips, who is also in the room with us, an engineer who has been stewarding this current proposal related to this protocol level liquidity incentivization. Sean was over at Sunshine. Sunshine is a validator that's now closing down, and Sean's moving over to Cephalopod. So this project is kind of now housed within Cephalopod validator. I guess where I would like to land here is there's a signaling proposal discussion up right now. I'm certainly accepting and listening to this critical feedback from Michael, Matt, Sasha. Very open to it. I'd just like us to be able to continue to move forward with a technical specification for how to address this issue. So whether that's protocol-owned liquidity or some other implementation, I'd just like us to be able to continue to move forward on implementing something rather than kind of stall out with, okay, this doesn't work. What do we do?
Right. Well, so what I'm hearing, so there's a technical side that I think, taking a step out, I think a few things are very clear to me about trying to synthesize what I'm hearing. I think it's really important for Regen Network, for Regen holders, to be able to have the tools to both provide community-owned or protocol-owned liquidity, right? To be able to move that in an interchain environment, number one, and also to be able to inflate it, to like mint new rewards to an arbitrary interchain address, such as a gauge. Those are two functionalities that I think are really important for us to have. And that work is happening, is very exciting. I think the question is around the rates and the use of those. So if the governance proposal can be like, hey, we're developing this capability, and then later we're going to do some work and bring concrete economic proposals to bear for how it's going to be used in the future. But here's sort of like, these are the general uses. This is some of the inspiration for why this is important to be able to build and adopt. And then we can later go through a governance process to think about the rate of, if we're going to increase the rate of inflation for, liquidity or for some other purpose. I think it's just better to take that out and not to make assumptions, because, there were assumptions made with, I think, probably pretty high increases of inflation and other things, which maybe were causing some of the alarm bells. So being very specific about that, separating it out. I also think it's going to be really important for us to start. So it's sort of like number one, separating the sort of technical implementation with, how we're going to make the decisions. And then another thing I'd like to add is as Regen Ledger adopts 046 SDK version 046, we are going to have the groups module capability, which along with Auth-Z and interchain accounts will give us much more granular capability to govern these things in a sort of like in a technical, economic way. And so I'd also suggest we quickly start thinking as a community about kind of an economics council that is actually doing some of this work that maybe we're, endowing with Regen, maybe some other orgs are helping fund, and we're actually sort of getting serious about articulating this bigger vision. So those are my sort of takeaways in this. Yeah.
Can I add some stuff? Because I've seen or even clarify some
Please.
points that you made. So one is that you're articulating a pretty strong separation between what the technology can do and how we make policy using that technology. That's super important. So like, yeah, obviously we want to be able to make certain types of policies related to liquidity and other things. But if we emphasize the separation between building software that increases the scope of the policies that we can put into effect, as distinct from the act of sort of proposing and passing and implementing a particular manifestation of that policy space. So things like the inflation for liquidity, making it possible to do that is not the same as actually doing it, or making it possible to do that is not the same as doing a smaller or larger rate. I'm going to double click on this though, because right now we're only talking about one, technical change in that direction. And in practice, I think something that is very different from rate is sort of who has the right to receive from, say, those gauges. So I think you and I talked about this briefly, but there's a possibility to also create the technical infrastructure for saying you can provide liquidity and be on this list in a sense, and using this sort of access control like functionality that admittedly would need to be built as a way of enforcing some of the values aspects of the network and or the longer term buy-in while still providing liquidity incentives. In fact, you end up getting higher effective APYs for parties that take the steps to get the status, you can think of it as a status, in order to receive the weights for their liquidity. And something like this might look like saying, addresses that have previously received grants for labor or ... you name it, you still have to make policy that says, this list represents this, concept, this phenomena. Again, the simplest example is have received grants for labor or are in good standing according to some contribution policy, etc. But yeah, I'd really push for thinking in your technical build space for policy making that admittedly can enshrine some slightly more subjective concepts, especially because when you have a environmental mandate, you're not going to get away from some sort of oracleization of information that lives outside of the chain, but then you of course have to manage and evolve those interfaces to ensure they're not being gamed.
Yeah, great. And I particularly like this idea of being able to have sort of variable token reward system for both, I think maybe potentially for both security and liquidity and other network utilities where, we're sort of building a trust graph. And, if you're managing, if you've minted eco credits as a project developer, or if you've been a purchaser in the marketplace, or if you have been working on engineering through a grant, or there's like a list maybe of 5 or 6 things that we think are valuable, and and that's where there's sort of like a bias towards, okay, if you're doing that and you hold Regen and you're providing liquidity as a service to the community, you're going to be rewarded in a higher way. That's what you're talking about, and I think that's a very interesting discussion, and I think it's a very interesting utility to be thinking about. And it might be sort of like a phase 2 sort of thing, so we might focus one on having the basic tools and the basic technology and testing very low rates in order to build a little bit more liquidity and sort of proceed. So, as you're mentioning, Will, we don't just get stuck, right? And then we might be speccing out some of these larger engineering requirements and ideas and moving towards that, which I would note is very complementary with the idea of how we're thinking about internalizing a lot of the economic activity around originating ecological assets, which is currently off-chain, right? And over the next year, we're going to be bringing that economic activity on-chain in a thoughtful, iterative fashion, so that we can design from what's really working and how to accelerate what's working instead of making assumptions. And I think a big part of how that's going to work well is this sort of badging, really resonates with this kind of badging approach where we're starting to build sort of a trust graph and an identity system that is managed at the protocol level. So I think that's a really lovely invitation.
And I want to just bring it back to the fact that I'm not actually advocating for any specific policy even within that regime. I'm talking about making sure that you have the technical affordances to make certain kinds of policies. So you're still going to want to maintain that separation between the set of things that your community can do, like what's their governance surface or their sort of the set of policies that are implementable in the current version of the software, as distinct from the specific policies that are currently implemented. And I would agree, your summary before about the precautionary principle should hold, because basically in all of these systems, you should be looking at things as asymmetric, always asking what can I do and what can I undo, and wherever possible, if you recognize something isn't undoable or can have sort of irrevocable outcomes, then you're generally going to want to inch into that thing and do the pilots that are small or just articulate that they're ephemeral. So be clear very upfront that what you're doing is something that is not guaranteed to be persistent and in fact will end at X period. Although to the point earlier, liquidity is not something that is reversible in the sense that stopping or tuning down the inflation does not undo the historical monetary base increase.
Fantastic. We're moving. We have moved past the usual hour hard stop. I was able to be a little more flexible today than I oftentimes am, but I also want to be conscious of everybody's time. Do we want to just do a quick closing go around? I want to make sure that if there's any sort of concluding, summarizing thoughts, because this is a complex topic, so I don't want to do a hard drop, but I also want to start moving towards closure here. So, and apologies for folks who are requesting to hop up on stage. I think we're just going to kind of keep it with a summary here, and then close out and have further conversations about this topic on Commonwealth or at a future date.
Yeah, and I am 8 minutes late for my next call, so I'll just wrap up here to say I appreciate all the comments here. I notice Matt from formerly Sunshine, now Cephalopod, is also now in the room. If this goes longer, I will listen to the follow-up. And it does seem like maybe there's a middle road here where there's a dialed back version of this one set of functionality that we can kind of sandbox very limited shift in inflation and see how it goes at the same time as exploring some other pathways. So I'll leave it there and thank you all and hop off.
Thanks, Will. Any last comments or words from our block science friends, Matt or Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to get to kind of where everyone else went in the idea of okay, zooming back out. And I think we heard some things that are important, right, of the people that are already involved at kind of the core mission of Regen, which includes the validators, but then bringing in enterprise owners as well as the actual participants in the marketplace, but really kind of thinking about that core set of people and how they can contribute, say, more naturally to liquidity, would actually be a sustainable way to provide sufficient liquidity for those partners.
Yeah, cool. That's a nice sort of thing to reinvoke and anchor. Sasha, any last observations or thoughts that you want to leave folks with, or that you're taking away? Something that you ahas or yeah.
No, I mean, I think this was a very healthy discussion. There's something that Zagan said to me, which has been going in my head a lot the last few days, and it's something like, unfortunately, a lot of the best practices in Web3 are actually anti-patterns if you take the long view. And I think that would be my sort of final thought for everyone to reflect on.
Right, and so the best practice there maybe that is being indirectly pointed at is pumping short-term liquidity as something that's like an assumed thing that must happen, maybe as an anti-pattern for real network health.
Right, exactly.
Right, but we do need to think about liquidity, and we need to have sort of a healthy and reasoned approach to maintain liquidity as a community and think about how to do that in a way that incentivizes other attributes of health, such as participation in, ecological regeneration, participation in science, participation in engineering and governance, participation in the primary activities that the state machine of Regen Ledger is built to enable. Right. And so that's the big takeaway.
It's not a question, in my mind at least, and I think we're all aligned here, as to whether we need better liquidity or not. It's more a question of, are there ways to incentivize the right people to provide liquidity? Are there better ways? Can we be more specific? Can we have sort of, higher guarantees on incentivizing long-term community members and sort of breaking open the design space a bit and then thinking through, being creative about how we do that. And I think you actually, Greg, you posted some really interesting ideas on that on the forum post, which I would encourage everyone to check out. And I think the block science, Matt and Zagan have some really deep insights there too from their experience, which I think we should we should discuss further.
With respect to the liquidity, I mean, to be clear, that was exactly what I was talking about. And I think the thing I would like to highlight is that if your actual goal is to create some, persistent liquidity after a program that involves sort of rollout of inflation via something like gauge weights or just liquidity incentives in general, then you need to be looking at this as a sort of almost like an ad spend at the network level. You are sort of recruiting new community members via that liquidity program. And if when the program ends, everyone leaves, it was a failure. So like if you look at this sort of impulse where you're like, we expanded the monetary base by this percentage over this year or two, and in the process, we brought in this much liquidity. But if the program ends and all of that liquidity leaves, excuse me, you've incurred the cost of the monetary base increase, but you've not created a sticky positive impact in terms of liquidity. So you had a permanent cost and a transient benefit, and that is fundamentally unsustainable. And so you need to be looking for policy making, assuming that you have long-term goals, which doesn't sort of misalign the costs, and again, there's like a differential order mismatch there. You incur permanent costs for temporary benefits, and as long as those benefits go away when you turn off the inflation, then the program is not really accomplishing the goal in a sustainable way. And it's a somewhat technical way of analyzing algorithms, but you can kind of see it in the frequency domain signature of this kind of policy. And so just being aware that this mental heuristic of permanent cost versus transient benefit is not generally sustainable. So we can measure success of something like a liquidity program by how much retention we get of the new liquidity, not just whether it comes in temporarily.
Nice metric. Ishmael, you're off mute. Do you have anything that you want to add here before we start moving to closing?
No, actually, I was just setting my phone down and the thumb hit the button. But yeah, it sounds great. I'm really interested in learning more about these liquidity. They're very complex issues, and so great to hear everyone share their opinions, and looking forward to more conversation about this as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm super grateful for everybody's time. Grateful for everybody out in the audience for listening in. These are always, yeah, I mean, I just love having these conversations out in public. I'm going to be, either I or maybe David will be trying to post a recording of this conversation into both the allow list denom conversation in or various threads of conversation in Commonwealth and into the liquidity management sort of governance and management conversation that are on Commonwealth, just trying to build multiple forms of discourse around these important governance processes and really just, you know, grow our muscle as a community around how do we have healthy discourse and dialogue? How do we, you know, move towards better and better decision making at a governance level? And how do we do that in a nested way, right? Because, you know, some of these are going to be really require the plurality of regen holders. Some of these we may sort of create breakout groups. So I'm kind of holding in these conversations, just to sort of say out loud what I'm holding is kind of building our capability to have conversations like this in a better and better and better way as we're moving through these processes in which important decisions need to be made. And so that's kind of some of the intention and why the Regenerati News Hour was born, is to sort of be able to dig into things like this. So grateful for everybody being along for the ride. If you want to dig into the Commonwealth discussion, please do, or, you know, on here on Twitter as well. I think it's healthy to have discourse here too. You know, Matt and Michael, super grateful for you guys' time. Very excited to be, you know, deepening collaboration. Have really admired your work in the field for a long time. And so great. Thanks for being a pillar of sanity in a crazy crypto world. And Sasha, you as well. I'm super grateful for your time and attention on this and so many other things. So thanks to our community members. And with that, I'm going to close this out, and we'll see everybody next week on the Regenerati News Hour, if not before. So thank you.